Hi, everyone. It's pretty surreal being here because I still remember the day that I got the email letting me know that I would be presenting at this event. I was actually sitting in the kitchen of my Southern California home, which I just spent the past 3 days visiting. And I got the email and it said, "Congratulations, you have been selected and invited to present at the TEDxLehighU 2015 event." Like the slow fizzing of a champagne bottle, I could feel my insides slowly bursting with excitement. I was going to present at a TEDx event. I had spent countless hours listening to many TED Talks and had found tremendous inspiration through the speakers who had shared their stories. I, Jessica Liu, was going to have a chance to speak at a TEDx event. I was going to have a chance to share my story. As equally as I remember the excitement I felt that day, I will also remember the emptiness I felt. I shared the news with my mom, my dad, my uncle, and my grandma, whom were all sitting in the kitchen. "I'm going to be a speaker at a TEDx," I told them. And as I fumbled over in my broken Chinese, I tried to explain to them. TEDx 他们就像人家会讲东西，然后他们会给 presentation. TED Talks 他们像 National Geographic, 然后会讲很 popular 重要的东西. I remember at that moment thinking, National Geographic? Did I really just compare a TED Talk to National Geographic? But at that moment, I had desperately scrounged my brain trying to find something that my first generation Taiwanese Chinese family members could understand. And that was the best I could come up with, National Geographic. They nodded their head in a similar fashion, in the way that I remembered when I was a master's student in counseling. It was a nod that I had received when I came home and told them that I had just finished my final master's project. It was a nod of mere acknowledgement because they could not understand that I had just written an 87-page paper on 20 hours of sleep over a span of 7 days. It was a nod that I had received when I came home and told them that after a 2-hour behavior therapy session with a child with autism, I had successfully gotten him to trace the letter J. They could not understand that after being bit 12 times and scratched countless times, that tracing a single letter was enough. That was the nod that conveyed to me, I don't know what you are saying, I don't know why it's such a big deal, and I don't really care to learn more. It was the nod that had always disconnected me from my family. It was the nod that had silenced me. It was the nod that had led me to believe that I was alone in my own thoughts, in my own home. Seeing that nod again that day brought me back to all the emotions and work that I had put into understanding my relationship with my family. All the times that I had tirelessly tried to bridge the cultural gaps within my own family. It brought me back to the time when I had tried to explain to my friend that when on my first day at Lehigh, when someone had asked me, "Where are you from? Where are you really from?" that my feelings of offense were valid and that I was not simply being overly sensitive. It brought me back to the times when my sister silently wept as she tried to explain to my family why she wanted to quit her stable job so that she could go travel in Asia, and that doing so was just as valuable, if not more, than her 6-figure income. It brought me back to the times when I was a therapist at a hospital trying to explain to the staff that the Chinese mom whom felt she had failed as a mother because of her son's failing grades was reason enough for her to want to commit suicide, and that she was not being irrational. These are the realities of culture gaps, and the issues related to culture gaps are pervasive and all around us, in our relationships, within our homes, within our communities. And the fact is, these issues will only begin to make their presence known as cultural diversity begins to rise. As of today, there are 7.3 billion people in the world across the span of 196 countries, with roughly 6,500 spoken languages. Within the US, the number of immigrants has increased from 31.1 million in the year 2000 to 41.3 million in the year 2013. And according to the US Census Bureau, the so-called minority will become the majority by the year 2043. And even within our own Lehigh campus, the number of international undergraduate student enrollment has increased from 156 to 334. Cultural diversity is unavoidable, and so will be the clash of cultures if we do not begin to prioritize the importance of bridging these cultural gaps. However, these gaps aren't as easy to bridge as we may think they are, because the fact is, these cultural gaps can be exhausting. They can be exhausting because they can lead to misunderstandings and they can disconnect people. Because of my friend's difficulty, or what I had perceived as her inability to understand my feelings of offense, I felt misunderstood and invalidated by my very own friend. Because of my family's emphasis on taking care of the family, they viewed my sister as selfish, whereas my sister felt that such an expectation hindered her freedom to grow. And because of the hospital staff's difficulty in understanding the mother's cultural values, they struggled to come up with a safety plan, which continued to put the mother's life at risk. These are all the examples of how cultural background had been the star player of all these cultural collisions. And within this context, culture is so much more than the color of a person's skin. Within this context, culture entails also one's lived experiences. And these gaps will continue if we do not begin to acknowledge that these lived experiences are real and all around us. And these lived experiences can include one's background, one's upbringing, one's religious values, and so much more. And the fact is that when we only look through our own cultural lens, we will only widen these gaps rather than bridge these gaps. However, the reality is that I was also guilty of doing such a thing. I had always continued perpetuating the gaps within my own family. Rather than trying to understand them and what they were going through, I just kind of assumed that they didn't know what I was talking about. However, when I reflected on my own family dynamics, I realized that there were a multitude of gaps. There was a language gap, and not everything I was saying could be linguistically understood by my family. There was a generational gap, and my family comes from a generation of printed newspapers. They didn't know what TED Talks were, let alone be happy for my achievement. And there was a cultural gap. Even if they understood the significance of my achievement, they did not express pride and joy in the same way that I had hoped for. And so I realized that I needed to challenge myself to look through my family's lens, a different lens, and to consider the possibility that the way that I was seeing things wasn't the only way. I realized that I had interpreted their actions, their inactions, their words, and their silence through my own lens. Rather than trying to understand how their experiences and their worldviews could be contributing to this perceived felt gap, I had blamed them for not being supportive, for not understanding, for not caring, when in reality, I myself had failed to look through their own cultural lens. And so, to be culturally aware means to understand that such a process includes that everybody has different cultural values, different cultural beliefs, and different cultural perceptions. That the way that each person sees the world varies as colorfully as a rainbow. There was a shift within me, and I began to look at all the gaps around me. I thought about my exchange with my friend, and I realized that I was being just as culturally insensitive if I did not try to understand her intent through her cultural lens. And so to bridge the cultural gap between us meant being willing to engage in uncomfortable and really challenging dialogue to begin to look through one another's lens simultaneously. And let me tell you, that was not an easy conversation. However, through that dialogue, I was surprised to find that perhaps it wasn't just her or me that was right or wrong, that it is possible for both parties to be culturally unaware and to be culturally insensitive. As I struggled to juggle the tension within my family, and I thought about my sister and my mom and my dad and everybody and all the difficulties that they were thinking, I realized that I couldn't just side with my sister's frustration or my family's disappointment, that perhaps both views were valid. And my sister was able to finally experience her definition of freedom. And rather than vilifying the hospital and assuming that they didn't care about the patient or that they didn't understand, I had to consider the possibility that they were simply trying to do what they thought was best for the mother. And so, just as how experiencing these cultural gaps can be exhausting, so can be addressing these cultural gaps. I realized that after reflecting on these experiences, how tiring it was to try to bridge these gaps. But what surprised me the most was that I felt a strange sense of freedom. I felt liberated. I had always felt like cultural gaps and cultural misunderstandings were so far from my control. I couldn't make my family be proud of me. I couldn't control what the hospital thought. I couldn't control what anybody thought of me. And the reality is that I realized, yeah, we can't control the way that anybody acts, the way that anybody believes, the way that they think, and the way that they engage with anybody. But the one thing that we can always control is what meaning we take away from each of these situations. What meaning we take away from each cultural collision. Because the reality is that while these gaps will continue to occur, and while these gaps will be attempted to be bridged, we will always have a sense of control over our awareness, an awareness of how we view life, and an awareness of how others view life. Thus, I am here today to simply invite you to be culturally aware in the way you think, the way you talk, and in the way you engage. To consider the possibility that when you are engaging with someone, that there is a possibility to offend. Because being aware means that you have to be aware when you might be having a predisposed assumption about someone simply based off their skin color. Be aware of misunderstandings that you may have of someone when you feel like they aren't understanding you, and perhaps challenge yourself to engage in that difficult dialogue. And perhaps when you are asking someone, before you ask them, where are you from? Think about what message you are sending, and perhaps ask them what their story is. Being culturally aware doesn't mean that you will be an expert in all these cultures, or that you will have an answer to all these questions. And it can be as simple as having the desire to be aware. Because in having such a desire, it can mobilize you towards having interactions and relationships that are meaningful, respectful, culturally sensitive, and filled with awareness. And so I have come to share with you my story of how I have only begun to bridge the cultural gaps within my own life. That every day I am continuing and will continue to bridge these gaps. Because the reality is that while there is some triumph in having bridged some of these gaps, new gaps will always arise. For years, I had thought that my parents' nod was meant to silence me. I had thought it was the nod that had conveyed to me, I don't know what you're saying. What you're saying isn't important, and I don't really care to learn more. However, when I was finally able to put my own emotions of hurt aside, to finally try on a different lens, their lens, I was able to consider the possibility that perhaps for my family, it was a nod that had meant, we don't know what you are saying. We do care. We just don't know how to respond. But tell me more. It was a nod that I had used to silence myself. However, now that I am more aware, I'm so excited because moving forward, there are so many possibilities for our relationship to transform. Thank you.